Hey everybody, it is Drac from DDO Players. I am privileged to be sitting down today. I stole him away from all of his hard work that he is doing. I have the Executive Producer Severlin and also Community Manager Quarterman here to chat about DDO.
How are you today?
I am not doing bad. How about you?
I'm doing great. Lots of snow for us, but it's been cleaned up, so...
Yep. And hello, everyone. How's it going?
You guys have been getting nailed with snow. You got quite a bit of snow this winter.
You know, we're paying for a less snowy early winter with a more snowy less winter.
Yep, that's the same thing. I'm here in Indiana, and we got the same thing. We had a great early winter, and then now we're paying for it, and it sucks. I'll be glad when it's spring. That's all I'm saying.
It's still March. We still have, 3 storms left?
Easily, yes.
Yeah.
That's unfortunately that is probably going to be the case. But you know, what are you going to do? At least we have DDO to play, right?
Yes, that's what you do. You while away the time playing DDO.
So before we get started into the good DDO, I realized I have talked to you several times now on the podcast, and I never put you through the initiation that I put all of my first-time guests through. So we're going to pretend this is the first time I talk to you, and I'm going to ask you the question I ask everybody. What is your history with gaming and your history with D&D?
I started playing D&D in high school. I still have an active first character that runs in my brother's campaign, even though he lives in LA, that I started in 79. I have other active characters in my friend's campaign from 83. I play a whole bunch of tabletop games. I still actively play D&D. My friend is actually running us through Waterdeep Heist, which was cool because, usually he does homebrews. So, and I'm playing a cleric of the Raven Queen currently, in addition to my large sort of stable of D&D characters. The D&D character I started in 79 is actually Severlin, which is where my namesake comes from on the forums.
I was going to ask you that. That did not come from Blake 7, or did it?
No, I don't know the reference to Blink 7. Is there a Severlin in there?
Yes, there was. So,
no.
we had a couple of our listeners actually write in and said they figured it probably came from the sci-fi show Blake 7. So there you go. It did not. And you are DDO's executive producer. So can you give me a elevator pitch of what the heck that actually means?
So I kind of run the studio. I'm the executive producer, so I help the team come up with sort of the future of the game and make sure that things go well in terms of, the health of the studio and what the games are doing and what the teams are doing and all of that. In addition, when I find some precious free time, I do the fun stuff, like actually sort of dig into DDO a little bit in both terms of engineering and design.
So let's get into some of my other questions here. Let's start out with just overall, looking back, you guys just launched Ravenloft last year. What do you think you did well with the launch of Ravenloft, and what do you think you could have improved during that launch?
Ravenloft was pretty well received, and the dungeons were flavorful and pretty interesting. I think some of the dungeons in Sharn are even more interesting. The thing about Ravenloft is I thought that we did a good job of... It's a pretty oppressive campaign, because it's meant to be horror, and I thought that the dungeons were pretty spot on in doing that without being overly gloomy. So, the dollhouse was creepy, but it didn't go on too much, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
If that makes sense.
Oh, yeah, no, perfect sense.
The players seem to like the sentient weapons which were introduced there, and that system is still ongoing. And we can talk a little bit more about that, if you want to do that. And it really did well for us in terms of player participation. So we were pretty happy with Ravenloft.
Let's talk about the sentient weapons. Do you have plans to improve them, upgrade them, add on to them in any way?
Yeah. So for the sentient weapons, we'll definitely have new sets, upgraded sets, maybe slightly better than what is out there, in order for players to figure out, what sets are we going to do. In addition, there is a chance that sentient weapons will get another slot at some point as well. In addition, with our new artifacts that are coming out in Sharn, since they also use filigree, you can kind of decide how best to make sort of an extended set. So if you find a minor artifact with 3 slots of filigree, all of a sudden your total filigree slots expand, and maybe instead of doing the 2 sets you want to use now, you can do a partial 3 sets, or mix and match in different ways in terms of getting the one minor artifact that you're allowed onto your character.
Yeah, and we were going to talk about artifacts when I asked you about Sharn. That's definitely something I'm interested in talking to you about. Well, I think it's good that you plan on kind of, continue on with the sentient weapons, because I know players did, as you said, well, those were well received. And I know in pen and paper, for me, that was always one of the funnest parts, too, is getting one of those weapons and interacting with it. And I think you guys did an amazing job with that interaction, actually.
The voices, I'd like to do more voices, because I think that they're fun, and no matter how good a voice is, eventually you'll get sick of it. So rotating in new voices is sort of a good way to reward players. Mm-hmm. In addition, the way we design sentient weapons is because you can pass the gem onto new weapons in the future. It can continue. It's not like some of the crafting systems where you'll never touch it again. Your hard work can pass and then onto your new weapon, and then you can find new filigree for it, and the system is pretty expandable.
And I know over on the Lotro side of things, you guys just launched your legendary progression servers. Has there been chatter in the office about maybe doing that for DDO as well? Because it seems like they were very well received over on the Lotro side.
They were, but so the point of progression servers is that there's a certain nostalgia to having a reason to start again. And the reason that you don't want to start again on a normal server is nobody is playing that content. So you're pretty alone. But when you do a progression server, what ends up happening is, because we stop you at a certain level, everyone is playing through Angmar, and you can play through that nostalgic content with everyone. For DDO, we could have different kinds of servers, but because it has reincarnation, our invested players have played through the early area a lot. Mm-hmm. So giving them a reason to play with their friends through the earlier areas isn't as important as something like Lotro, because they've already done it, and they do it all the time. And when your group decides to collectively reincarnate, you're all back in Korthos and playing through that over and over again. Like, I am intimately familiar with Red Fens because I've played through it so many times. As I've reincarnated, it's one of the areas I like to go, because I don't know why I'm a glutton for punishment for the underwater mod. You know what I mean?
Right. Oh, yeah.
Like I just happen to like that one. And, I play through Dalara's, obviously, for Voice of the Masters, and now I've been poking into some of the newer content as well, Slavers and Temple and stuff. But all of that is revisited as we get to the end and come back. So for a alternate server in DDO, it would have to have a cool new set of rules that give you kind of a new way of playing, or have a good twist on it. And that's something that we would definitely be interested in doing, but that's why we don't do a straight progression server.
And that makes sense. And I kind of said that when the Lotro progression servers came out, and I know on the podcast we were kind of talking about it, and I said a progression server as it stands wouldn't make much sense in DDO, because we have the TR, which is kind of the same thing in a way. So it would be interesting to see how you guys would put a twist on it. But at least that's something you are talking about, and maybe in the future, possibly.
I would say that there was a good chance of us having some kind of other server with an alternate set of rules.
Just what those rules are still, that's being debated, and whatever, whenever that happens, it happens.
Yeah.
All right, perfect. Let's get on. You did kind of mention, you kind of led right into my next question, actually. I was going to ask you about the classic packs. You recently just had the producer's letter came out today, which we're going to talk about, and I know on the anniversary stream, you talked about a couple of classic packs. So let's talk about the, quote-unquote classic packs, and how do you decide which one you're going to do? I would love to set in on those meetings.
It's sort of like the Dungeons and Dragons equivalent of Ninja Warrior. Survives to the end. That one gets made. Yeah.
There are a lot of classic packs I would like to do. White Plume Mountain was fairly easy because the White Plume fits well with sentient weapons.
Mm-hmm.
And we didn't want to do White Plume until we had a good idea of Whelm, Wave, and Black Razor, right? So as soon as the sentient weapons went in with Ravenloft, White Plume was a good next version. Keep on the Borderlands is classic, and we've been looking for an alternate to Korthos. Keep on the Borderlands won't be as good as Korthos for a brand new player because it won't have the same hand-holding kind of learn the game features that have been refined in Korthos. But if you're on your 7th, TR, then it will be like, oh my God, I can play something different.
Exactly.
That's awesome. The thing about Keep on the Borderlands with the Caves of Chaos and all of that is it's actually a fairly straightforward adventure, as it's meant to be an introductory adventure. So for DDO, it'll be interesting to see how we sort of add kind of twists and turns that make it interesting for the players.
And then what are some of the challenges that you guys have in bringing in like a classic module like that to DDO?
For Keep on the Borderlands, now that we have goblins, it'll be easier. That would probably be the biggest one. Doing large landscapes, like for Temple of Elemental Evil, for instance, the Village of Hamlet is an investigation where you have to kind of go and chase down and talk to a whole bunch of NPCs. And that doesn't translate as well to sort of like the fast-paced action of DDO, because what ends up happening is you just kind of run around and click on a whole bunch of NPCs. And even though the first time through there will be players that are really into that, I'm not naive enough to think that the 5th time you play it, you're not just basically click, 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 click. And for a lot of players, that's what they do without reading. The first time is we found out when we have dungeons where you actually have to read the text and they don't know where to go. You know what I mean?
Right.
And there may be people sitting in this very room that aren't Jerry that are guilty of clicking through a lot of the text to get to the action.
That might have happened often.
Yeah. So, I mean, I do it, like people do it. But so you want to be careful on the classic packs. The other classic pack that doesn't work is there was a Shrine of Toakomen or something. I'm trying to remember the name, but like it's the classic pack where you end up being captured and thrown in, and then you fall into the kind of like an Aztec flavored shrine.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
You can't do that because we would have to have a lot of tech to deny you your equipment so you could find it at the end, and I don't necessarily think that would be fun.
Well, I always hated that in pen and paper when the DM did that. So
right, so that takes off some classic mods, and then it's also what Wizards of the Coast is doing too. You know what I mean? Like that also, or more importantly, what they're not doing sometimes is like we don't want to step on their toes either in terms of stuff.
Yeah, and can you, I know I've asked you this before, but can you just kind of rehash this a little bit? Can you kind of explain your relationship with WotC? I know a couple of our listeners has asked me to ask you that before.
I don't quite understand the question. I mean,
like
they own the IP,
right,
and they make sure that when we go through our stuff that it fits their vision of things, and they've been great to work with. So very rarely do we actually run into an issue where the vision that they're looking for is something that we run into problems with.
Right.
So
okay, yeah. So like let's say you want to bring classic module X to the game, you go to them and say, hey, we're thinking about doing this, and then it kind of goes from there, and then you talk, and then
it usually starts in a casual discussion on our meetings. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
They're generally great about it. And then once we get sort of verbal, it goes through. And I don't want to go into the details of the
Right.
approval process, but
No, that's fine. Yeah, that's perfectly fine.
I think to reverse the question briefly about how we decide which classic pack to do as we're going through that long list of names, I think we don't just look at what the challenges are, but what the strengths are. When we look at something like, a Ravenloft or Temple of Elemental Evil, Haunted Halls of Evening Star against the Giants, upcoming Keep on the Borderlands, we look for things that what would translate well to DDO, not so much as what would be difficult to translate to DDO, but when we're going through that process, things bubble up to the top as DDO fits really well for that. So it's almost a little bit of a reverse of kind of finding what doesn't work. You really more kind of see what works best, bubbles up to the top, and then schedule it from there based on the process we were talking about earlier.
And you kind of hinted at it with the Keep on the Borderlands and the Goblins. A lot of those classic modules have the classic D&D monster attached to them. So are there any monsters that you think are classic D&D monsters not yet in the game that you would love to bring in to DDO?
Yeah, I mean, basically the reason we want to do Isle of Dread is because people are just dying to add various kinds of dinosaurs.
Right. Oh, heck yeah.
And the reason why we're not doing Isle of Dread sort of next is because the art resources made to do the dinosaurs couldn't fit in the schedule yet.
Yeah, I can imagine that is going to be just for the animation alone. I think for those dinosaurs, I can imagine the hours of work that is going to go into that.
Hopefully at some point, some D&D player will literally be fleeing from some huge dinosaur and it'll all be worth it.
That will be amazing. I cannot wait. Well, the producer's letter did come out today, and we did get a little bit new information out of that. I think the biggest thing I'm going to ask you, and I'm going to expect to get the polite, I'm not going to answer that question, but we're going to ask that anyway. The biggest thing I took out of the producer's letter today was we are going to get a new class.
Indeed.
And that's all you're going to tell me, right? Just indeed?
That's all I'm telling you. I mean, so the reason we're not telling people yet is because there's still some stuff behind the scenes that has to be decided with it, right? And we have to make sure the class fits in to, our sort of array of classes and offers something, if not new, a different take on something that the players can do.
Okay, perfect. I had to ask, but I'm excited. That's exciting to hear. And then you did kind of mention that we're going to get a Sharn pack as well. That is going to be free to VIPs and the season pass holders. You want to shed a little bit more light about that upcoming Sharn pack?
You mean the one so there'll be the Sharn expansion,
right?
And then we'll continue along those lines with more adventuring in Sharn. That will be a general, the typical dungeon pack that players are used to. And it will, have all of the social pieces that you would expect for Sharn and be more classically fun in terms of our dungeon packs. Good for leveling and good loot and maybe some end game stuff. So we want to follow up Sharn. Sharn is big. And I don't know that we wanted to. I think one, even as big as our X pack is, I don't think that that's enough to contain all of the stuff that we wanted to do with Sharn. It's great to have a giant urban setting to revisit a new urban setting, so that the players can sort of experience the factions and the rivalries and all of the various areas of Sharn.
Yeah, I am looking forward to Sharn. That was always one of my favorite areas to adventure in pen and paper, so can't wait to see what you guys do with that, and we'll talk about Sharn a little bit later on as well, too. But also in the producer's letter, you did mention you're going to do some work on Epic Destinies. What can you tell us about what you're planning on doing with those?
We'd like to make more Epic Destinies useful, obviously. Some of the ones are very good, and then some of them the players kind of live through in order to get sort of good to open up the stuff. Unlike the class passes, where we're going to do a full pass on each class, as we've been doing, and we're basically finishing that up finally with, we still have Pale Master, for instance, hasn't been touched, and that's a kind of an interesting one to touch because it uses negative energy, which is unlike anything else. I think that what we're going to try to do is do fewer amounts of changes on all the epic destinies at once, see how that comes out, and then change them again. And so the progression towards epic destinies will be all of the destinies will be touched a little bit. We'll see where we are, and then they'll be touched again, and then touched again, instead of going and saying, we'll do Shadow Dancer first, and then we'll do Archmage. And that way, as you're playing through, everything is being brought into balance sort of simultaneously, rather than, what's the latest epic destiny that they've touched. We're going to play that this week.
And then you also, another thing that was news in the producer's letter was we're getting a new racial variant, which I don't think we have heard about before. That was the first time I remember either reading or hearing about anything about a new racial variant. Anything you want to tell us about that?
Yeah, so for the Wood Elf, we started an idea of sort of racial variants in that, it's not a full race, but it does offer significant art upgrades and some changes to the tree. And I think that we want to continue sort of doing that so that players can get different visuals in terms of doing that. Like there are certain races that I would like to see revisited in terms of body type.
Mm-hmm.
So like I want to revisit actually multiple ones in order to give the players kind of different types. Probably the older the race, the more likely we are to visit it. But I don't know what order we're going to do it in yet, because it depends on the art resources. So I don't want to commit to a specific race.
Right. No, it's perfectly fair. But you're eventually, if I understood you right, you eventually would like to see maybe revisiting all of them and maybe getting a racial variant for everything? Is that how we took that?
Just some.
Okay.
Like Half-Elf needs to be updated. I think of all of the races, Half-Elf absolutely just needs to be updated in place. A racial variant doesn't make sense because some of the textures in Half-Elf are actually broken. So that just needs to be fixed. But there are other races that we'd like to offer a different look. And it's all about not, like, let's say that you were playing a half-orc and you loved your character. We wouldn't want to introduce a half-orc race. We wouldn't want to revamp half-orc completely and make your character look completely different. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah. No.
Because maybe you
Totally
love your
get where you're
character
coming
and you've
from.
been playing for 10 years. So racial variant allows us to kind of offer additional looks without changing your character in place of whatever race we're going to do.
Right. Okay. Perfect. And then I did have a couple follow-up questions because Cordovan stole a lot of my questions I was going to ask you when he talked to you during the anniversary stream. Thanks for that, Cordovan, by the way.
You're welcome.
But there was some interesting things you did talk about in that wonderful interview. If you have not watched it yet, go do that. I'll link it down in the show notes for this little interview episode here. You did talk about a tweak to Reaper mode, and I know a lot of people were interested in that. So do you want to expand maybe on what you told Cordovan about that?
If we do, can we all agree that if I talk about some of the things that we're doing, that these are early thoughts that will go to the Players' Council and to Lamania, and the players will give feedback on?
Sure.
So
I
we
think
have
that's
an
fair.
apple. It's going into the blender, and we have a pretty good sense of what it's going to look like when it comes. But, yeah.
So a couple things. One is we want tanks to be able to keep threat without intimidate. Meaning when you do your stance, you should be able to use damage to keep threat, because there's a lot of creatures that are immune to intimidate. And so a tank should be able to tank in a lot of content. And sometimes people will just avoid content with creatures that can't be CC'd or intimidated because they run all over the place and kill everyone. So I think a big boost to tank threat is something we're looking at. I think charm is too powerful because the creatures get the charm, the monster bonus. So I think that one of the things we're looking at is charmed creatures should be on par with the players and not boosted up in Reaper. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
And then looking at having new kinds of Reapers to help but only at high level Reaper. So like at Reaper 6 and greater, new kinds of Reapers might be able to appear. And that will give that sort of a reason. So, some new surprises that the players will be able to sort of revisit Reaper and make it more exciting without being like annoying. You know what I mean? Like
Right.
We don't want to just bump up damage because people are doing Reaper 10, because quite frankly, we like that some people can aspire to doing that. But there are some things that the players have fallen to a pattern of that we want to revisit. Some boosts to some things and some reductions to others.
And I like how you in that interview you kind of mentioned that you would like to see a Reaper that when you see it, it's one that you don't want to kill right away. I think that totally would give a new play style to Reaper mode.
Yeah, I mean, the idea for something like that is that we want the players to have to take their time, if they need to, be able to take their time, sort of figure out what they're going to do and approach it methodically. And anything that we can do that rewards the players for paying attention and for if their play style and their play habit can change to make their time through Reaper more successful, that's probably a good change. As long as we don't, but we're not trying to change the time it takes to do Reaper. Like our end goal wouldn't be that Reaper takes longer. Our end goal would be that there are times when you have to take different strategies, and basically Reaper is all about rewarding player skill and knowing the dungeons very well. Or, okay, maybe it's more about like punishing players who aren't paying attention. To be honest, I'd like to say rewards, but Reaper about the DM being kind of mean and unfair. So
right,
like that's more likely what we're sort of looking for.
Okay, and there's like no, just to get this out to the community, there's no timeline on this. This is just big long-term goals. Again,
we don't think that we would be able to test it or get feedback before Sharn. And we don't want to, quite frankly, we don't want to, we want the players to give feedback on Sharn on our test server. So we wouldn't want to distract them with Reaper changes before that.
And let's just jump right into Sharn. Now, we do know the name of it is Masterminds of Sharn, which I think is very apropos if you're familiar with any of the Sharn lore at all. Can you give us some scale and scope of how big Sharn is going to be?
It should be comparable to Ravenloft.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right? Like, obviously that's basically what we're using for our basis. When you play it, it should be, it should feel that big. So some of the content I would love to spoil because I've seen it and I'm super excited about it, but I'm not.
Right.
We know that a raid will come with it, and then a raid will follow. That's something that have no problem sharing. There'll be a whole bunch of stuff to do in the cogs. That will be sort of an adventuring area with a whole bunch of content. So, and then there will be a storyline. I think the difference between this expansion is there are story dungeons and non-story dungeons in terms of how you play through it.
And I know
there's more side stuff to do.
Yeah, you had talked about that a little bit. You had an interview in Dragon Plus. And you kind of talked about that a little bit, how the questing in the cogs might be a little different than what we're used to. You want to expand on that a little bit in case anybody didn't read that Dragon Plus interview, which was an excellent interview, by the way.
We'll be previewing it pretty quick, and so I don't want to put preconceived notions in it, because if I do, one, we want the players to kind of experience it to give good feedback, and two,
that's fair, yeah.
You know what I mean? If I put preconceived notions, then I'm worried that the feedback will be kind of tainted when people first see it. And that preview is coming soon.
I was going to ask when we were going to get another preview, hopefully, of a quest. Awesome. And I know
I think in the relatively near future, we're probably going to hear more about the specifics. We have announced that we are intending to start taking pre-orders in March. And I think along with that will be the release of a lot more of the kind of how big and what you can expect in a more formal fashion there.
Okay, excellent. And I know we just did get a Lamania preview on the Tieflings, and I was pretty happy with how you did the tail and the horns. What was some of the challenges you had with that tech?
Oh my god, the tails were a giant pain because they're all animated. The race is actually every single rig in the Tiefling, all hundreds and hundreds of animations. They had to go in and basically animate the tail in all of them.
Your poor animation guy, does he ever sleep at all?
He rumor has it that he doesn't actually.
Oh, because it's just all the work that guy is doing for, like, he did cloaks and then he did the tails and the horns, and oh my god,
Rob is awesome.
Just because I'm a little closer to the Lamania process here, you did mention, how are the tail and horns coming along? They are in a early preview state on our public preview server right now, but so they will be kind of undergoing some refinements and tweaks and changes in the coming weeks here, but it's coming along just fine, and you'll be seeing in subsequent previews even more polish in that on.
Which, I'll be totally honest with you. I was surprised at how well they looked in the first preview. I'm trying to think how I want to word this. I didn't have high expectations for him, and you succeeded my expectation. I was like, wow, they really did this well.
We have a lot of experience now in doing like multiple races, particularly in this game. We like to add races. I mean, we just like the player variety and as much cosmetic sort of variance as we can. So Tiefling, we had a lot of experience in adding the Asimar, and then fortunately we had a lot of experience adding cloaks too. So when we added cloaks, we had a lot of sort of, in order to do that massive process, we developed sort of tools and methods and sort of a strategy for sort of modifying a lot of stuff at the same time. And so they're just really good at it.
And how about the artifact system? I know that kind of was brought up a little bit. You want to explain that and how that's going to work, or as much as you can talk about it?
Sure. So artifacts, there are a couple of things. So artifacts are powerful items that drop that supplement your sentient weapon. When an artifact drops, it has, like a sentient weapon, a filigree slot and then a maximum amount of slots that can be opened up in the same way. And then when you put on your artifact, any filigrees you put on will count for your set bonuses. But you have to be careful because you don't want to put on two of the same filigree because the basic effects won't stack. So you don't want to put on like Eye of the Beholder Intelligence twice because the ints won't stack even though you'll get credit for two set bonuses. So for the artifacts, they're a little different. They don't have a sentient gem. You feed magic items to them in the same way, but they're easier to level up. So it's cheaper to get slots for them because they don't have a gem you can remove. So as you get sentience, you basically you level up the one that you want and you can open it up, but you don't pass any kind of artifact gem from artifact to artifact like you do with sentient weapons.
Okay. All right. Perfect.
But they're cheaper to level. And also for artifacts, you can only have one. So if you find multiples, you're going to have to decide which fits best with your suit.
Perfect. Excellent. All right. And also in Sharn, how about some new monsters?
Before I go on that, I just want to clarify. Yeah. You can only equip one artifact, one minor artifact. You can have multiple minor artifacts, and you can advance multiple minor artifacts, but you can only ever have one equipped at a time. So you don't have to make a decision of, if I get this artifact, I can never have another one. It's more like, which one am I going to equip for this specific situation? I apologize. I just wanted to make that clear.
Oh, no problem at all.
On to monsters.
What kind of new monsters are we going to see in Sharn, if any? I assume we'll
Goblins
get some new
are in
ones.
There.
Yeah, excellent.
So we kind of sort of looking at that. We have like various new characters to threaten and aggravate. I mean, give the players plenty of opportunity to fight against. So that will be fun. And have the other monsters been announced?
No.
Should I?
No, we can't.
That's why I was trying
right.
to get something. See, Jerry's always like putting the block on
Well,
all my fun.
the thing is, I know there may be some places we're going to be announcing things, and I can't steal the thunder
Right. No, that's cool.
right here, right now. I'm sorry.
Fine.
We're going to make a vampire killer. It specifically goes after people who like vampires. I hope that's okay, Drac.
And tieflings, right?
Yeah,
So people that like vampires and play a tiefling, they're going to die first. Gotcha. Great.
yeah.
Great. It's all right. Well, I know we're running a little long on time here, so we're going to start wrapping this up. I did post over on the DDO Reddit, and I asked if anybody had any questions, and I got some questions. Got a ton of questions over there. I'm going to save some of them for the next time I talk to you, but we're just going to power through a couple of these as we wrap this interview up here today. Have one from Byzantine Bobby. He asked, will we see more content in the Forgotten Realms or maybe Ravenloft? Or are they considered, quote, done?
Neither of them are done. We should be seeing content in both at some point is our goal in terms of that. So I'd like to do that and basically visit upon both of them. I'd love to do more Ravenloft, like another adventure pack there. I think that, that feel is very different from everything else. And when you walk into Ravenloft, like it definitely has a certain theme to it that makes it very distinctive. But both of those should be revisited at points as we move forward. We're just super excited for Sharn right now. So, and then we have a classic pack coming after that. So we haven't been talking about alternate campaigns that often.
And then Psycho Philosopher asks, the playable Kobold race, when? Why not now? What racial skill stat? Yark?
So, for the playable Kobold race, here was the question. Do we want a playable Kobold race to be like hard mode, meaning you just have really crappy stats and you have to see if you can survive the whole thing? You know what I mean? Like with so few stat points that maybe you can't even play some of the races. And then every time the Kobold gets to the end, they can kind of reincarnate with those precious few stat points and work their way up to heroic level. We would love that because like it would be really hard to play through a lot of the content as a Kobold to start. The question is, would the players enjoy that? As much as it appeals to some of the more hardcore DDO players that are on the team, I don't know if the players would like that or not. Because it's hard to justify having kobolds that are fully formed as adventurers if we don't do something like that.
And I think by like that, we probably also mean like that enough that we can, put it into the schedule and justify doing that kind of work.
Yes.
In the future here. Yeah.
Yes, but there have been like there are a lot of discussions like that about like wouldn't it be cool if, and then they go through sort of like pass 1 and pass 2 and pass 3 of like, okay, would this be fun for more than the 10 minutes of novelty that it would require? You know what I mean?
Right.
Like that's ultra cool, but if you're like at level 4 and running on normal and still having to kind of kite stuff, how cool is that going to really be? I mean, it certainly would test, the players in terms of like how well they would do. But
again, like the classic modules, I would like to be in on one of these meetings just to sit there and just imagine how heated some of these discussions would get in the office. Spartan Killer 13 says, will there ever be a UI update? For example, maybe turning the Pale Master's HP bars purple and having dead people's map icons be gray, or the ability to reorganize where people are in your party lineup?
Sure. That's a matter of like one of the things I'd like to do at some point soon after Sharn comes out is a day of devs time where we say, okay, here are all of the small tasks that you would like to see. And a lot of the UI elements have come up. The problem with playing a lot of DDO is I'm kind of blind to UI improvements because I'm so used to the game that sometimes it's easier for a fresh set of eyes or to see it or to elicit player stuff. So I suspect after Sharn that one of the things I like to do is another day of devs time thread where, okay, if you had a full day that a dev was going to devote to your idea, what would you suggest? And then we'll pick like, the top 10 or 20 of them, depending on what they are. My only problem with the day of dev times is people like sometimes will like suggest tasks to take 3 months, or like, hey, you should for the day of dev time, can you completely revamp, this entire system? And it's like, oh my God, that would take 6 months. So that's the threat of day of dev's time is that, and those people are like, why don't you listen to my ideas? So, but most of the time, most of the players are super cool about it. I just don't want to get in a situation where the players kind of don't have an instinctive understanding of how much work something is and then feel disappointed when we can't approach their idea.
And Chucko Pudding Cup asks, is Sonics still on the table?
Psionics, you mean?
Psionics, yes, I'm sorry.
We would love to do at some future point psionic classes.
Yeah, no, that's been kind of, you talked about that before, even with us, you talked about that, so I know that's kind of always something in the back of your mind. Is there like one big challenge you're facing with those, or is it just
the sheer size of it?
I was gonna say, is it just the size and the time commitment it's gonna take? Okay,
right. Like a update to, like, you can't just add a little bit of psionics.
Yeah.
Right.
That's the problem, is that when we do psionics, it's going to be something big, right? And like, I don't know if people realize how much work a class is, for instance, but like for psionics, I would imagine that it would have to be introduced with like 2 classes at the same time, which is 6 new trees and any new systems. And then how do they play and feel different than magic? Because if they just are a mana class that feels just like a mage, why do them? So there's a lot of work into doing that. And then whatever content we release at the same time needs to have good psionic theme. So when that comes, it will be like, boom, a giant sort of cool packaged thing that comes all at the same time so that the players aren't disappointed. And that it's just a lot of work and takes scheduling.
I can imagine, just like coming from a pen and paper background that I have. I know that was always a tough class to even play. So I can imagine the challenges you guys would have introducing them. It would be fun, I think, but yeah, that would be a nightmare for sure, I bet. And then Stinger AE asks, is Sharn lore going to be built into the expansion the way it was for Ravenloft? Eberron post-dated his pen and paper playing, so the only thing he really knew about the world was what he learned in-game.
Absolutely. I mean, they're basically going through and combing Sharn lore for a whole bunch of cool lore stuff and Easter eggs and things like that. I think that Sharn will be a little more interesting because for Ravenloft, there was a large amount of content recently released that we could follow. Mm-hmm. And for Sharn, there has been some stuff released, but it's not quite the same as here is the adventure pack room. So that means that you'll see a whole bunch of different kinds of content that you might not expect because it's not following a specific book.
And then our final question from the community is from Rule Red. Which products in the industry inspires you? Which game made you think we should have that as well?
I'm a fiend for a whole bunch of stuff. I like story-driven and character-driven games. Everything from wizardry, from like my old Apple IIe through, the Diablos and the Bard's Tales and the Ultimas and the, various awesome MMOs that have been released. So those are the kinds of games that inspire me. And the story of and the tabletop gaming. So being able to combine those into one thing is sort of like an awesome thing to be doing, and I love it. But those are the kinds of video games that inspire me in order to drive forth. But honestly, we get more inspiration from Dungeons and Dragons than we do from other video games in terms of like how we're going to do things.
Which would make sense. I mean, because just makes sense. So, well, all right. Well, I thank you for taking some time out of your schedule today to talk to us. We look forward to seeing Sharn. and then Keep on the Borderlands after that, and Isle of Dread apparently after that. So a lot of cool things ahead of us here for Dungeons & Dragons Online.
Absolutely. I'm psyched. I wish I could tell, like, this stuff I've seen in Sharn that is awesome, and I have to wait just a couple more weeks to sort of let the cat out of the bag.
We can just pretend nobody's listening, and you can just tell all.
All right. So on that last question, 100 oozes fall into the pit. I'm just saying. Just workshop with this. No,
wow, that's evil. All right. Thanks for taking your time out today.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.